Squidward's house looks like a cartoon Easter Island head. It was built from the same volcanic rock as the actual statues, carved to hold their ancestors' spirits. But Squidward's version is far stranger, with hidden rooms and unusual features behind its face, making it unlike anything else in Bikini Bottom. In this video, we break down Squidward's house. Section 1. The stone that inspired it all. The real Easter Island heads have bodies. The popular image of those statues shows massive stone faces rising out of the ground, but that picture is incomplete. Centuries of soil buildup buried their torsos gradually, and when researchers excavated around the most famous ones, they found full carved figures underneath, arms pressed flat against the sides, and intricate designs carved into the backs that almost no one knew existed. What looked like isolated heads were always the tops of something much larger, most of it hidden. Squidward's house is named after those statues. He says so himself, in the episode called SB-129, referring to his home plainly as his Easter Island head. The connection is in the show's own dialogue, plain and undisguised. But to understand what that design choice actually means, and why someone creating a cartoon neighborhood in 1999 would reach for those specific statues as the shape of a house, it helps to know what a moai really is, where they came from, who built them, and why they look the way they do. Because the design of Squidward's house pulls directly from one of the more remarkable construction stories in the ancient world, and from a set of beliefs about what stone figures are supposed to do. Rapa Nui is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. The island sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, more than 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continental landmass. Small and triangular, formed by 3 extinct volcanoes, it covers roughly 163 square kilometers of land in one of the emptiest stretches of ocean on the planet. When Polynesian settlers first arrived, estimates place that arrival somewhere between 800 and 1200 CE, they found a volcanic island covered in forest. Over the following centuries, a culturally distinct civilization developed there, one with its own language, its own social structure, and eventually its own form of large-scale monument building that had no real parallel anywhere else in Polynesia. Those monuments are the moai. The word comes from the Rapa Nui language, and the full traditional phrase describing them is Moai Aringa Ora, which translates roughly as, the living face of the ancestors. That phrase carries the core of what these figures actually were. They were never decorative. They were never built to mark territory in the way a modern border marker might, or to celebrate a victory, or to impress foreign visitors. They represented the spirits of deceased chiefs and important ancestors, and the belief was that the spiritual power, called mana, of those ancestors could be held within the stone itself. As long as a statue stood properly and was maintained, that ancestor remained present on the island in a functional sense, watching over the living, protecting the community, ensuring food and fertility continued. The figures were not symbols of power, they were understood to be holders of it. Carving a moai began at a volcanic crater called Rano Raraku, the quarry where the vast majority of statues were made. The stone there is compressed volcanic ash, a material called tuff, which is soft enough to cut with stone tools, but hard enough to hold its shape for centuries once it has been carved. Workers would begin by sketching the outline of the figure directly into the rock face, and then cutting away everything surrounding it, working on the statue while it was still attached to the bedrock below. The face came first, the brow, the nose, the long ears, the compressed mouth. Then the arms were worked close to the sides, the hands carved with fingers pointing toward the lower torso. Only when the work was nearly complete would the connection to the bedrock be severed, freeing the figure for transport. Some statues never made it out. Hundreds remain in the quarry today, frozen mid-process on the slopes of the crater in various states of completion, lying at angles in the rock, as if the workers simply walked away one afternoon and never returned. The largest statue ever attempted at Rano Raraku was never finished. Had it been completed and raised upright, it would have stood close to 21 meters tall, a figure of such scale that raising it would have been nearly impossible with the tools and methods available. The quarry itself holds evidence of the ambitions that went beyond what the island could realistically support. Moving a finished moai was one of the great logistical challenges of any pre-industrial society. The average statue stands around 4 meters tall and weighs roughly 14 tons. Some are considerably larger. How the Rapa Nui people transported them from the quarry to their final positions along the coastline has been genuinely debated among researchers for decades, and no single explanation has settled the question completely. One long-standing theory suggests the statues were placed on wooden sledges and dragged across log rollers, requiring large organized teams and sustained coordination over distances that sometimes stretched several kilometers. Another theory, supported by practical experiments carried out in recent years, proposes that the statues were walked upright using ropes attached at different angles, teams pulling in sequence to rock the figure forward in a controlled shuffling motion, step by step across the landscape. Both methods have been demonstrated to work. Neither has been definitively confirmed as the actual method used. What is not disputed is that the statues traveled, that they ended up on stone platforms called ahu, positioned along the coastline, and that most of them face inland, their backs to the ocean, looking toward the communities they were meant to protect, rather than toward the sea. Their faces carry a quality that is difficult to describe, but immediately recognizable once seen. The moai have heavy brows that project forward, long noses with slightly flared nostrils, defined jaws, and a set to their expression that reads as serious without reading as angry. There is no warmth in those faces, and no threat either. They project something closer to settled authority, a face that has made its decision and is simply present with it. Many statues, when in active ceremonial use, were given eyes fitted into the carved sockets, white coral with dark obsidian or red stone pupils. Those eyes gave the figures a sudden, startling presence, something that shifted the statue from a carving into something that seemed to look back. When the eyes were removed or lost over time, the statues returned to the more familiar distant expression that photographs show today. For centuries, the civilization at Rapa Nui continued building, and the statues grew more ambitious over time. Research published in recent years, using detailed three-dimensional mapping of the quarry at Rano Raraku, found that production was carried out not by a single centralized workforce, but by independent family clans, each working their own section of the quarry simultaneously. Different groups competed with each other, pushing their statues to be larger and more impressive, a kind of escalating rivalry visible directly in the stone. Earlier statues tend to be smaller and relatively uniform. The later, larger attempts represent clans, testing the limits of what their resources could support. Some of those attempts were never completed. The competition appears to have driven the construction forward long past the point of practical sustainability. Exactly what happened to Rapa Nui's civilization after that peak period is still being studied, but by the time European ships arrived in the 18th century, large numbers of statues had been toppled, the island's forest cover had been significantly reduced, and the population had declined sharply. Contact with Europeans brought diseases the island's population had no immunity to, and subsequent slave raids in the 1860s removed a devastating portion of the remaining people. Much of the oral knowledge surrounding the statues, the specific traditions, the names of the figures, the ceremonies associated with them, was lost across those generations of disruption. What survives today is pieced together from archaeology, from comparative Polynesian cultural knowledge, and from fragments of oral history that managed to carry through. Squidward's house is dark blue, real moai are gray and brown, weathered volcanic stone with centuries of lichen and exposure on their surfaces. The color is clearly animated rather than literal, but the shape is a direct reference. The wide, flat-topped head, the heavy brow that projects forward, the long, prominent nose, the mouth set back slightly beneath it, the rectangular overall form with a broad, settled base. The expression that reads as serious and faintly disapproving, without tipping into hostility. All of those features are present in both the real statues and in the design of the house on Conch Street. Steven Hillenburg, who created SpongeBob SquarePants, came to animation from a background in marine biology. He had taught at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, before pursuing a graduate degree in experimental animation. His scientific knowledge shaped Bikini Bottom in ways that go well beyond the biology of the characters, including the choices about what structures would occupy an underwater suburban street. The houses on Conch Street are all objects that could plausibly end up on a seafloor. A pineapple, a rock, a large stone statue. Moai are carved from volcanic rock. They are heavy, they are ancient. On the ocean floor, they would simply be another settled relic, sitting in the sand the way they sit on the slopes of Rapa Nui. Beyond that practical logic, the choice also carries meaning specific to Squidward as a character. Hillenburg designed Squidward as an octopus rather than an actual squid, specifically because octopuses have large, bulbous heads, and he wanted a character who thinks of himself as an intellectual to visually reflect that self-image. A figure who considers himself cultured, misunderstood, and operating at a higher frequency than his surroundings would naturally gravitate toward a house that looks ancient, significant, and mysterious. Moai carry those associations in the popular imagination. They represent a civilization that achieved something extraordinary under difficult circumstances, leaving behind monuments that have outlasted almost everything else from that era. For a character who nurses a constant, wounded sense of being unrecognized, living inside a monument feels like a quiet statement about how he sees himself. A 2004 publication called SpongeBob Exposed, described as an insider's guide to the show, states directly that Squidward's house was built from volcanic rock. That detail lines up with the actual composition of the real statues, which are carved primarily from compressed volcanic tuff, a form of volcanic rock, with a smaller number made from basalt. The show acknowledges, through that one material detail, that the house is meant to be read as belonging to the same category of object as the real Moai. Stone, dense, formed by volcanic pressure, designed, in its original context, to be permanent. Squidward's house is the tallest of the three buildings on Conch Street. The pineapple and the rock sit lower, while the Moai rises above both. Real Moai also vary significantly in height, with the tallest successfully erected statue standing around 10 meters, and the scale of the figures was part of their function. Height communicated significance. A larger statue meant a more powerful ancestor, or at minimum a clan with the resources and labor to build something of that size. The house standing taller than its neighbors is consistent with what Moai were originally built to do. They were built to be seen. They were built to dominate the landscape around them without needing to be aggressive about it. The house on Conch Street does the same thing, rising above the pineapple and the rock, with the quiet certainty of something that was never going to be subtle about its presence. Those two windows near the top of the structure, set into the face of the Moai at eye level, look out over the street from a height neither neighbor can match. What sits behind those windows, the rooms inside, the layout of the floors, the spaces Squidward actually lives in, is where the clean logic of the exterior gives way to something considerably harder to map out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The statues that inspired this house were carved to hold the spirit of an ancestor, built to last and to be seen from a distance. What Squidward placed inside those stone walls is a very different kind of story, starting with a ground floor that has a lot more going on than the face of a statue would ever suggest. Section 2, 122 Conch Street. Standing on Conch Street and looking at the three houses from the outside, the first thing that strikes any visitor is how little they resemble each other. Patrick's house is a brown rock sitting on the ground, flat on top, rounded on the sides, no windows, no visible door. From the outside, it looks exactly like every other rock in the neighborhood, which is presumably the point. SpongeBob's house is an orange pineapple, tall and ribbed with dark green leaves fanning out at the crown, the kind of tropical fruit that washed into the ocean somewhere and settled into the sand as if it had always been there. Neither of those two houses makes any visual argument for the people living inside them. They are what they are. The rock is a rock. The pineapple is a pineapple. Squidward's house is different in a specific way that the other two are not. It has a face. Not a suggested face. Not a shape that kind of looks like one if approached from the right angle in the right light. An actual face, fully rendered, with a brow and a nose and a mouth, the features distinct and recognizable from across the street. The house looks at the world. It has an expression. That expression has never changed across more than 25 years of episodes, and yet somehow the house always seems to be reacting to whatever is happening around it, even when it does nothing at all. Part of that is the design itself. The particular set of those features, the weight of the brow, the severity of the nose, the way the mouth sits just slightly compressed, communicates an emotional state, without needing to move. The house looks mildly displeased. Permanently, quietly, specifically mildly displeased. At everything. at the pineapple, at the rock, at the street, at the ocean above it and the sand below. The address is 122 Conch Street. SpongeBob lives next door at 124. Patrick is on the other side at 120. Those numbers place Squidward exactly between his two neighbors, which is the physical arrangement the show has maintained since its first episode in 1999. No matter how many times the house gets moved, destroyed, rebuilt, or swapped out by the needs of a particular story, the default position is always the same. The moai between the pineapple and the rock, sitting in a row on a quiet suburban seafloor street. One fish who lives in a piece of coral once mistakenly claimed during an episode that Squidward lived on Conch Drive, rather than Conch Street, which the show played as an error on that character's part. The address has always been Conch Street, and 122 has always been Squidward's number. Looking at the house from the front, the first thing the eye lands on is the upper portion of the face. Two windows are set into the stone at the level where the eyes would naturally fall on a human face. They are the eyes of the statue, repurposed for ventilation and light. Both windows sit on the second floor, which means anyone inside looking out of either one is looking down at the street from a moderate height. The choice to place the bedroom on the left and the gallery on the right, as mapped across most of the show's run, means that Squidward wakes up each morning behind the left eye of his own house and plays his clarinet each evening behind the right. From the outside, anyone on the street looking up sees two dark rectangular windows where the moai's eyes would be, the stone face looking outward at nothing in particular, while Squidward moves around inside it. Below the eye-level windows, the nose of the statue protrudes forward. On the real moai, the nose is one of the most prominent features, a strong vertical element that pulls the face together and gives the statues much of their distinctive profile. On Squidward's house, the nose serves the same visual function, though it has no interior purpose. No rooms are accessed through it, no corridors run behind it. It exists purely as part of the exterior face, a carved protrusion of stone that makes the house look like itself. The mouth is the front door. In the earliest episodes of the show, before certain design choices settled into place, the mouth of the statue was closed. A conventional door sat underneath the closed mouth, beneath the chin of the face. At some point in the show's early run that changed, and the closed stone mouth became the opening itself. The wooden door is now fitted directly into the mouth of the face, which means that every time Squidward opens his front door, the house's mouth opens with it. Every time he lets someone in or steps outside, the face on the building parts its lips. This produces a relationship between the act of entering and the expression of the building that the show never comments on directly, but never lets go of either. The door and the mouth have been the same thing for so long that it no longer reads as a joke. It simply is how the house works. A short wooden walkway leads from the base of the door to the street, planks of wood laid across the seafloor, a modest approach path of the kind found in front of many houses on the show. It does not suggest wealth or ceremony. It is a practical connection between the inside of the house and the street outside, kept minimal in a way that matches the house's overall self-presentation. Dignified, but not extravagant. Present, but not making an announcement about itself. From the side and back, the house presents a different profile entirely. The broad, forward-facing flatness of the moai facade gives way to a more compact stone body. The back of the house has a single square window, set into the wall, at a level that corresponds to one of the rear interior rooms. In episodes where Squidward's garden appears, it is accessed from the back of the house, along with a wooden shed that contains his gardening tools. The garden shows up inconsistently, appearing in some episodes and vanishing in others, but when it does appear, it sits directly behind the main structure in a space that is never visible from the front. Squidward tends to grow flowers and vegetables back there, maintaining the garden with the same quiet investment in private pleasures that characterizes most of what he does at home. The color of the house during daylight hours is a dark blue, not a bright or vivid blue, but a deep, settled shade that reads as cool and slightly withdrawn. It suits the stone it is meant to represent, and it suits the character who lives inside it. Blue is also the color of the ocean, which surrounds everything in Bikini Bottom, so the house sits within its environment, without clashing against it, even though its shape is entirely unlike anything that grows naturally underwater. At night, the color shifts. The house turns a dark red or purplish tone, a change that the show has maintained consistently across seasons. No episode explains why this happens. The color shift is simply a fact of the house's existence, accepted without comment. Some things about Bikini Bottom do not come with explanations. They are the texture of the world rather than plot points to be resolved. The house is noticeably taller than the ones on either side of it. This is consistent, not a perspective trick or a background error. The pineapple has height as well, its leaves adding considerable length to the top of the structure, but the overall impression on the street is that the moai sits above its neighbors. The base of the structure is wider than the pineapple's base, and the stone face rises in a single unbroken vertical line from the ground to the crown of the head, with no taper or narrowing to soften the size of it. Looking at the three houses together, the moai commands the center of the row without doing anything in particular to earn it. It is simply large, and stone, and there. The two eyes of the house look out at something specific in terms of geography. Because the house faces forward, toward the street, and toward the ocean beyond, the windows on the upper floor look out over whatever is happening on Conch Street at any given moment. Squidward's bedroom looks toward SpongeBob's house, which is to his right. His gallery faces the same direction. There is no window on the front of the ground floor. The living room and kitchen and dining room all exist in the interior of the stone, without facing directly out toward the street, through the face of the statue. Light gets into those rooms through the mouth door and through whatever interior arrangements the show provides in a given episode, but the ground floor is not designed to look outward. The face of the house presents its upper story eyes to the world and keeps everything below the nose enclosed. That arrangement has a practical effect. Squidward cannot look out of his living room and see the street. He can look out of his bedroom or his gallery, but only from the second floor, from behind the eyes of the moai. Every view out is an elevated view, looking down slightly at the neighbors, at the passing fish, at whatever SpongeBob is doing in his front yard. Whether this was a deliberate choice by the show's designers or simply an outcome of working with a statue as a floor plan is not documented in any available source. The result is the same either way. The house positions its occupant above street level at every point of outward-facing visibility. At various points across the series, characters standing outside the house have noticed it reacting to what is happening around it. In one episode, when SpongeBob cries loudly and persistently outside, the face of the house contorts, the brow drawing down, and the expression shifting into something openly frustrated, the house reaching out with formed stone hands to cover its ears. In another episode, the house leans toward the street, its whole body tilting to get a better look at something happening nearby, then quietly rights itself when it realizes it has been seen doing so. These moments of low-level sentience are small, fast, and played entirely for the reaction they produce. The house does not speak during them, does not make sustained eye contact, does not draw attention to itself any more than it already does by being an enormous stone face on an otherwise quiet residential street. These are background jokes, blink-and-miss moments, that reward anyone watching closely, and they only work because the house has a face to begin with. A face is the necessary condition for all of it. Without the eyes, there is nothing to narrow in displeasure. Without the mouth, there is nothing to press into a thin line when the noise gets too much. The design choice that made the house look like a moai is the same choice that gave it the ability to express things, even without speaking, even in the background of a scene, even when it is technically just a building on a cartoon street in an underwater suburb. Real moai were designed so that their faces would hold spiritual presence. The face was the point of the whole structure. It was the interface between the living and the ancestor held within the stone. Squidward's house works the same way, just with a different kind of presence held inside. Not an ancestor. Not mana, just Squidward, moving between his rooms, playing his clarinet behind the right eye, sleeping behind the left, opening the mouth of his own house every morning to let the day in. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The exterior of the house presents a face to the street and keeps its interior arrangements private, tucked behind stone walls that have no windows at ground level. What those rooms actually contain, starting with the ground floor, is where the house begins to reveal how much it holds inside a shape that looks, from the outside, like solid stone. Section 3. The ground floor. Most of the action in Squidward's house happens on the first floor. That is true for practically every episode set inside the building. Characters enter through the mouth door, land immediately in the living room, and the story unfolds from there. The kitchen is a short walk back. The dining room sits off to the side. The bathroom is somewhere on this level, though its exact position shifts depending on the episode. The ground floor holds the routines of daily life, the cooking, and the eating, and the sitting in front of the television, and it is where Squidward spends most of his time at home when he is not retreating to the rooms upstairs. What greets anyone stepping through the front door is the living room. Green wallpaper covers the walls, a deep and slightly muted shade of green that does not draw attention to itself. The floor beneath it is a pink tile, which is a stranger combination than it sounds, until the eye adjusts and the room settles into something that reads as distinctly Squidward. Warm enough to be a place where someone actually lives, deliberate enough to signal that the person who chose these colors thought carefully about them. Squidward is a character who has opinions about aesthetics. The living room walls are not accident. Someone picked that green and that pink and decided they worked together, and the room holds that decision without apology. Furniture fills the space without overcrowding it. A bamboo chair sits in the room, the kind of furniture that suggests an interest in natural materials and a particular kind of earned taste. A couch sits nearby, broad enough to be comfortable, and in front of it a coffee table at a height suited to someone settling in for a long, quiet evening with nothing required of them. The whole arrangement points toward the television, which is positioned where televisions in sitting rooms always end up, the gravitational center of the space that everything else orients around. Squidward watches television in this room. He watches cooking programs. He watches art shows. He watches a program called House Fancy, which is where the episode of the same name begins. Squidward, on his couch in his living room in front of his television, watching coverage of houses much like his own, and forming opinions about them. Along one wall stands a bookcase. What it holds is not books, at least not primarily. The case is stocked with jazz records, a detail that quietly communicates more about Squidward than almost anything else in the room. Jazz is a musical form that demands a certain kind of listening, one that rewards attention and patience, and a willingness to follow something that does not always resolve the way more conventional music does. Squidward considers himself a serious musician. The instrument he plays is a clarinet, and clarinet is central to jazz as a musical form, one of its oldest and most essential voices. Keeping jazz records in the living room bookcase is not a decorative choice. It is a statement about what kind of house this is, and what kind of person lives in it, someone who has thought about music long enough to have opinions about specific recordings, and enough regard for those opinions to keep the physical records within reach. The television sits in the room with the jazz records, and that combination says something about the version of domestic life Squidward has built for himself. He is not performing simplicity. He is not pretending that comfort is beneath him. He watches television on his couch like anyone else, and he keeps his records on the shelf above it because both of those things belong to him equally. The room holds his everyday habits alongside his considered tastes without drawing a line between them. Behind the living room, toward the back of the ground floor, is the kitchen. The layout places the living area at the front of the house, closest to the door, and pushes the kitchen further in, so that anyone entering goes through the social space before reaching the more private one where food is prepared. This is a common domestic arrangement, and it reads naturally in Squidward's house, even given the unusual shape of the structure containing it. Somehow the rooms fit. The stone head contains a kitchen with a refrigerator, an island counter running down the center of the workspace, and 4 cabinets. The counter island is a detail worth noting, because it implies a kitchen designed for someone who actually cooks, not just someone who heats things. An island counter requires floor space on both sides of it, a kitchen large enough to move around in, and a reason to be in the center of the room rather than working exclusively against the walls. Squidward cooks. This is a fact the show returns to across multiple episodes, usually in ways that end poorly, but the baseline is established. He is the kind of person who has a kitchen arranged for actual use, with a refrigerator stocked with things he has chosen and cabinets organized the way he wants them. He keeps soap by the sink, specifically pink soap, which the show notes with enough consistency that it registers as a deliberate character detail rather than background filler. The kitchen is not just a room the house happens to have. It is a room that reflects how Squidward spends his time when he is at home and undisturbed. Off to the side of the kitchen sits the dining room. This is the room that most firmly separates Squidward's house from what might be expected of a cartoon character's home. Most animated domestic spaces have a table somewhere, usually pushed to the edge of a combined kitchen-dining area, functional and unremarkable. Squidward's dining room is a separate room with a round table, chairs positioned around it properly, and overhead, hanging from the ceiling, a chandelier made from a clamshell. The clamshell chandelier deserves a moment. It is an underwater chandelier, which means it is an object serving the same social and aesthetic function that a chandelier serves in any other context, marking a dining room as a space where meals are an event rather than just a necessity, adding something overhead that transforms the act of sitting down to eat into something slightly more formal and slightly more considered than it would be without it. The shell is a natural material, specific to Bikini Bottom's ocean environment. Squidward did not use an electric chandelier or a candelabra or any other more conventional fixture. He used what the environment around him provides, bent it into the shape of refinement, and hung it over the table where he eats alone. That dining room, with its round table and its clamshell light, is where Squidward keeps his shell phone. The shell phone is a nautical version of a mobile phone, and its placement in the dining room, rather than the living room or the kitchen, suggests that the dining room is where Squidward goes when he wants to communicate with the world. Or at least, that is where it lives when not in active use. The detail is small, but consistent with how the house is organized more broadly. Every room has a function. Nothing is left vague or general. On the ground floor, somewhere in the layout between the main spaces and the staircase that leads upward, there is also a bathroom. Its exact placement shifts between episodes, sometimes appearing to be on the first floor and other times presenting as a second-floor room, which is a continuity issue the show never resolved cleanly. The most consistent indication from multiple episodes is that the house has 2 bathrooms in total, one on each floor, though the show uses whichever one fits the story being told at any given moment without making the geography explicit. What sources agree on is that at least one bathroom exists at ground level, and that it contains a toilet and the appropriate fixtures. In the episode called House Fancy, both the toilet and the toilet paper in Squidward's bathroom are briefly shown to be capable of speech. The toilet moans and crawls out of the bathroom of its own accord after Patrick uses it during the episode, which is played as a consequence of what Patrick does to it, rather than as a routine feature of Squidward's plumbing. The toilet paper also has a voice in a separate episode. These are isolated moments of the show's broader approach to the world of Bikini Bottom, where objects can have interior lives without that fact being treated as remarkable. The bathroom is still a bathroom. It also happens to contain plumbing with opinions. Along one wall near the back of the ground floor, in the space between the kitchen and the upper levels, sits an elevator. In the early seasons of the show particularly, the elevator appears as the primary way of moving between the ground floor and the second floor, operating alongside a spiral staircase that serves the same function. Having both an elevator and a staircase in a private home of this size suggests either that Squidward planned for the possibility of needing one at some future point, or that the house came with both and he kept them. The elevator is practical in a way the spiral staircase is not. The staircase is beautiful and curves upward in a shape that suits the aesthetic of the rest of the house. The elevator is simply efficient. Keeping both is a Squidward solution to the problem of getting from one floor to another. There is also a room off the main ground floor, referenced in episodes and described in sources as a back room, that has wallpaper which is apparently very easy to peel. This is a specific enough detail to have made it into the documented record of the house's features. The back room appears in the episode called Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, and its distinguishing characteristic is that its wallpaper peels easily. What that suggests about the room's condition, or its maintenance, is not spelled out. The back room is simply there, accessible from the main ground floor area, with its peelable wallpaper and its lack of any other defined purpose in the documented layout. What the ground floor adds up to, when laid out as a complete picture, is a living space organized around a specific vision of domestic comfort. Not luxury in any excessive sense. Squidward is not wealthy. The house has a dining room chandelier made from a shell rather than crystal. The bookcase holds records rather than expensive objects. The kitchen island is suited to cooking real meals rather than catering. Every detail on the ground floor points toward a person who has thought seriously about how to live well on modest terms, who knows what matters to him, and has arranged his space accordingly. The green walls and the pink floor are deliberate. The jazz records are deliberate. The round table and the clamshell overhead are deliberate. The ground floor reflects what Squidward wants his daily life to feel like when no one else is involved in it. Quiet, organized, tending toward the refined without overstating it. A place where someone with serious artistic interests and careful habits can exist comfortably at the end of a shift at the Krusty Krab, where he does not want to be, in service of neighbors whose company he does not seek. The house is the place where Squidward gets to be the version of himself he would prefer to be all the time. The ground floor is where that version of himself makes breakfast, watches television, eats dinner under a shell light, and tries to maintain the quiet that the shape of his life on Conch Street makes almost impossible to sustain. Above this floor, reached by the spiral staircase or the elevator, the house holds the rooms that Squidward keeps most private, the spaces where his ambitions and his habits take their fullest form. The ground floor is where he lives. The floors above it are where he keeps the things that matter to him most. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Downstairs holds the everyday rhythms of eating, watching, and existing in the world. Upstairs is where Squidward keeps his paintings, his clarinet, his 492 self-portraits, and the bed where he sleeps with the instrument he considers his closest companion. Section 4. The upper floors. Sleeping in a clarinet case would be unusual for almost any person in any house, anywhere in the world. Squidward does not sleep in a clarinet case. His clarinet sleeps next to him. There is a difference, and it matters to him, because the clarinet is not stored when the day ends. It is not put away in a closet or set on a shelf or leaned against a wall at a safe distance. It rests beside him in the bed, in the space where a second occupant might otherwise be, tucked against the pillow under the canopy, as if it has earned its place there through years of loyal service. The clarinet's name is Clary. Squidward has given it a name. He keeps it close while he sleeps. The upper floor of the house is where this happens, behind the left eye of the moai, in a bedroom that holds more details than any single episode has ever fully shown at once. Reaching the second floor from the ground level requires either the spiral staircase or the elevator, both of which are accessible from the space between the kitchen and the back of the house. The staircase curves upward in a form that suits the house aesthetically, the kind of architectural feature that someone with Squidward's preferences would have chosen had he built the structure from scratch rather than inherited its basic shape from a prehistoric Polynesian monument. The spiral is elegant in a way the straight staircases of less considered homes are not. Going up, it takes slightly longer than a straight flight would. That is the cost of beauty in a domestic context, and Squidward has clearly decided it is worth paying. The bedroom sits on the left side of the upper floor, in the space that corresponds to the left ear of the moai from the outside. That positioning makes the bedroom the room immediately behind the left eye window, the one that looks out toward the right side of the street, toward SpongeBob's house. Every morning, or whatever passes for morning at the bottom of the ocean under a permanent layer of seawater, when Squidward wakes up and looks toward his window, SpongeBob's pineapple is the first exterior thing visible from that angle. This is presumably not something Squidward would have chosen had he been given the option to redesign the layout. The canopy bed is the room's dominant piece of furniture. A canopy bed is a substantial choice for a private bedroom, the kind of piece that signals a certain relationship with sleep, treating it as something ceremonial rather than merely functional. 4 posts rise from the corners of the frame and support the overhead fabric, creating a defined space within the room, a room within the room. Squidward sleeps under this canopy in purple or pink pajamas, with 4 slippers arranged for his 4 feet, the clarinet beside him on the pillow. 2 nightstands flank the bed, each holding a square-shaped lamp that provides the low light appropriate to a room designed for rest. The closet in the bedroom contains alarm clocks. Not 1 alarm clock, or 2, but a documented total of 58, filling the closet space in a quantity that suggests either severe anxiety about oversleeping or a specific history that made 58 seem like a reasonable number to accumulate. The episode called Employee of the Month reveals this detail. 58 alarm clocks in a closet is a fact that tells a particular kind of story about a particular kind of person. Squidward works a job he does not want at hours he would not choose, serving a boss he does not respect, alongside a coworker whose enthusiasm he finds unbearable. Getting to work on time matters not because he loves the work, but because the consequences of not doing so are worse than the effort of arriving. The alarm clocks are not an enthusiasm, they are an infrastructure. Some episodes show a television in the bedroom as well, though its presence is not consistent across all appearances of the room. When it is there, it is simply part of how the room functions on those occasions, an extension of the television watching that happens downstairs, carried into the private space where the day ends. The bedroom also contains at minimum one tall mirror. The mirror is large enough to reflect a full-length view, and in an episode called Nightlight, multiple mirrors appear in the room, enough of them to return reflections from several angles simultaneously. For a character who has painted himself nearly 500 times in various styles and media, the presence of mirrors in the sleeping space is not surprising. The face that Squidward returns to again and again as a subject is his own, and the mirror provides access to it at any hour. The bedroom connects to the bathroom, which occupies another section of the upper floor. The bathroom contains a toilet, a sink with a medicine cabinet mounted above it, and a jacuzzi tub with a shower function. The jacuzzi in particular is a feature that places Squidward's bathroom above the standard functional minimum of what a bathroom needs to contain. A jacuzzi requires planning. It is not included in a bathroom by accident or out of convenience. Someone decided at some point, either during the original construction of the house or at some later point of renovation, that the upper floor bathroom should have a soaking tub with jets, and that decision has been maintained as a permanent fixture. Squidward has a jacuzzi. He has 58 alarm clocks in a closet, and a jacuzzi in his bathroom, and a clamshell chandelier over his dining room table. The picture of domestic life being assembled across these details is specific and consistent. The medicine cabinet above the sink holds the items Squidward keeps for his personal care, including a rash cream that becomes relevant in the episode called Squid's Visit, when SpongeBob replicates Squidward's house in extraordinary detail inside his own pineapple, down to the specific products in the bathroom cabinet. The fact that SpongeBob is able to replicate the medicine cabinet contents suggests he has been paying close enough attention during previous visits to catalog what Squidward keeps in there, which is a different kind of unsettling from the show's usual register of SpongeBob-related intrusion. Squidward's bathroom is private. The things in his medicine cabinet are his. Their replication elsewhere, in a copy of his house built without his knowledge or consent, is played as horror in the episode, and the bathroom specifically is one of the spaces where Squidward's distress is most acute. Something about seeing your bathroom cabinet reflected back at you in someone else's version of your own home crosses a line that the episode does not try to justify. It simply shows Squidward's face and lets the room do the rest. Also on the upper floor is the gallery. Sources describe it as Squidward's art studio as well, a space where the two functions of production and display happen in the same room, the paintings created and then immediately hung where they can be seen. The room has red wallpaper and a white floor, a combination that is warmer and more dramatic than the green and pink ground floor aesthetic, more appropriate to a space where work is made, rather than where daily life unfolds. Two windows look out from the gallery, and it connects directly to the bedroom, so the two rooms form a private suite at the top of the house, the sleeping space and the creative space linked without requiring passage through any public-facing area. The self-portraits that cover the gallery walls are the clearest record of Squidward's artistic output across the series. By the time the episode Not Normal airs, he has 483 of them. By the time Squid's Visit follows, he has 492, meaning he painted 9 more self-portraits between those two episodes. The total at last count, across the episode record, is 492, though the show does not present this as a final number so much as a point-in-time inventory. Squidward has been painting himself with sustained commitment across a span of time the show does not define precisely, but implies is substantial. The paintings are not all the same. Sources across the show's documentation note that Squidward works in a wide range of styles and media, from realistic approaches that attempt to capture his likeness accurately, to wildly abstract interpretations of the same face. One painting in the gallery bears a resemblance to the style of Pablo Picasso. A portrait that appears in the game SpongeBob's Atlantis SquarePantis echoes the self-portraits of Vincent van Gogh in composition and tone. Squidward is not simply repeating the same image over and over, in slightly different colors. He is working through the problems of self-representation across multiple artistic traditions, using his own face as the consistent subject, while the approach to that face varies. The count of 492 is the record of a serious engagement with a single artistic question, returned to again and again from new angles. One of the 492 is a clown. Squidward has painted himself as a clown and hung it on the wall with the rest, which says something that is difficult to summarize quickly. Among the realistic portraits and the abstract experiments, and the Van Gogh echo, there is Squidward as a clown. The nose in that painting is described as tear-shaped, matching Squidward's actual nose in structure. He is still recognizably himself in the costume. The clown painting sits on the wall of the gallery, alongside everything else, displayed with the same seriousness as the rest. The clarinet also lives in this room when it is not sleeping beside Squidward in the bedroom. The gallery is where he practices, opening the window that looks out over the street to let the sound carry. Those clarinet sessions, heard by the entire neighborhood, are one of the recurring facts of life on Conch Street. The window that serves as the house's right eye from the outside is the window through which Squidward's music escapes the building. His neighbors hear everything he plays, which is either an accident of the layout or an expression of the desire to be heard that he would never acknowledge directly. Also on the upper floor is a library, referenced in episodes called Squidward, and the episode known as I Heart Dancing. The library is where Squidward reads, separate from the records in the living room bookcase, and separate from the art studio where he paints. A dedicated reading room in a private home of this size suggests someone who takes reading seriously enough to give it its own space. A room set aside for that one activity without the competing claims of the television or the kitchen or the artistic work happening next door. The library exists. Squidward uses it. The show has not spent extended time inside it, but its presence in the upper floor's documented layout confirms that the house contains more than what any single episode has shown fully. The upper floor of Squidward's house is where his most private life takes place. The sleeping and the dreaming, the artistic work, the reading, the soaking in the jacuzzi after a shift at a job that gives him nothing he actually wants. The rooms up here are not for visitors. The ground floor can receive people, can be entered through the mouth of the house, and navigated through to the kitchen or the dining room. The upper floor is accessed only by going further in, through the elevator or up the spiral staircase, past the point where the house's public-facing geometry ends and the private arrangement begins. What the bedroom and the gallery share, sitting side by side in the ears of the moai, is a quality of enclosure. These rooms are not visible from the street in any meaningful way. The windows show light and shadow to anyone looking up from outside, but the contents of the rooms remain interior, held within the stone. Squidward sleeps behind the moai's left eye, with Clary beside him. He paints himself in the studio behind the right eye, 492 times and counting, working through a question about his own face that he has never finished answering. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The upper rooms hold the most private version of Squidward's life, the one that happens after the door shuts and the neighbors are, temporarily, somewhere else. What the house is actually made of, and how something as ancient and massive as a moai ended up functioning as a working domestic space at the bottom of the ocean, is where the construction story gets specific. Section 5. Volcanic rock and what it takes to hold a house together. According to page 36 of the 2004 publication SpongeBob Exposed, the insider's guide to the show produced in the early years of its run, Squidward's house was built from volcanic rock. That single line is the only official material specification ever given for the structure. Volcanic rock, not poured concrete, not carved marble, not manufactured stone veneer, applied over a different underlying material. The house on Conch Street is constructed from the same category of material as the real Easter Island moai, which are carved primarily from compressed volcanic tuff quarried from the crater at Rano Raraku. The fictional house and the real statues it resembles share not just a shape but a substance. Volcanic tuff is formed when volcanic ash is ejected during an eruption and then compacted over time by pressure and heat into a solid material. It is soft enough relative to other volcanic stones to be worked with hand tools, which is why the Rapa Nui people were able to carve moai with stone and bone implements over hundreds of years. Despite that relative softness, it is dense and durable in ways that make the finished object essentially permanent under normal surface conditions. The moai that have survived to the present have done so across 7 centuries or more, of wind, rain, salt air, and occasional deliberate toppling and re-erection, the material holds. Once compressed volcanic ash becomes stone, it does not easily unbecome it. Underwater conditions are different from surface conditions in specific ways that matter when thinking about a stone structure sitting on the seafloor. Salt water is chemically active. It dissolves calcium-based materials over time, corrodes metals, and works on organic materials in ways that can accelerate decay significantly. Stone, however, is more resistant to salt water than most other construction materials. The moai at Easter Island are already exposed to salt air from the surrounding Pacific Ocean, and despite centuries of that exposure, their fundamental structure has not dissolved or crumbled. Volcanic rock specifically, being formed from geological processes involving extreme heat and pressure, is not a material that the ocean environment would easily defeat over a cartoon time span. The house on Conch Street has survived a great deal that would test any material. It has been picked up by oversized bubbles and dropped from height. It has had reef blowers fired directly at its face, removing the nose, the windows, and the mouth door in sequence before the force of the blast destroyed the remaining structure entirely. It has caught fire. It has been sacrificed to a volcano by the citizens of Bikini Bottom, which raises questions about the thermal tolerance of the material that the show does not pursue. It has been picked up and relocated by a king-appointed Patrick Starr, who wanted the cleared land for a Ferris wheel. It has been chewed into gravel by a character named Sam Starr and spat outward in fragments. It has been swallowed by a giant worm, along with the rest of the neighborhood. In each of these cases, the house is restored to its original condition by the following episode, without any explanation of how that restoration occurred. The volcanic rock, despite being theoretically the most durable component of the structure, does not appear to confer any actual physical permanence on the house within the show's logic. This is partly because Bikini Bottom as a setting does not operate on the rules of physical permanence in any consistent way. Buildings are destroyed and rebuilt constantly across the show. The Krusty Krab has been obliterated more often than Squidward's house. SpongeBob's pineapple has dissolved entirely in at least one episode, shrinking to nothing and leaving him homeless overnight, only to grow back from a seed by the following morning. The capacity of structures in Bikini Bottom to reconstitute themselves after destruction is not unique to the moai. It is part of how the world operates. What the volcanic rock specification does is tell something about the house's origin rather than its ongoing maintenance. The house was made from this material at some point before the show begins. It was carved or constructed from volcanic stone into the shape of a moai, and it ended up on Conch Street, and Squidward has lived in it since. The 2004 guide presents this as settled fact rather than as something open to interpretation. The house is volcanic rock. That is what it is made of. Everything inside it, the green wallpaper and the pink tiles and the clamshell chandelier and the 58 alarm clocks in the closet, exists within a shell of compressed volcanic material that has been shaped into the face of a Polynesian ancestor figure. How the rooms fit inside that shell is a question the exterior geometry of the house makes genuinely difficult to resolve. The moai shape is not designed to contain habitable space. Real moai are solid stone figures. There is no interior cavity in a real moai. The arms are carved in relief against the sides of the body. The head is a solid mass of stone above the shoulders, and the whole structure from base to crown is an unbroken column of material, with no rooms, no corridors, no internal architecture of any kind. The shape that Squidward's house borrows from the moai tradition is a shape that was originally designed to be solid all the way through. Making it livable required hollowing it out. The stone that would have filled the interior of a real moai has been removed, either in the original construction of the house or at some earlier point, to create the cavity in which 2 floors of rooms now exist. What remains is a shell of volcanic rock, thick enough to maintain the structural integrity of the exterior form, including the projecting nose and the heavy brow and the compressed stone mouth, while being empty enough inside to accommodate a living room, a kitchen, a dining room, a bathroom, a spiral staircase, an elevator, 2 upper-floor rooms accessible from the ears, a second bathroom, an art studio, and a library. The wall thickness required to hold all of that together, while maintaining the exterior proportions of a recognizable moai, would need to be substantial at the base, and more efficient higher up, where the head narrows toward the crown. Stone walls in traditional construction are thickest at the foundation and taper toward the upper levels as the structural load decreases. The house at 122 Conch Street would follow this principle by necessity. The ground floor walls are thicker. The upper rooms, tucked into the ears and the head of the statue, work with whatever stone remains after the rooms have been carved out. The architectural style of the house is described by sources as Polynesian, which is the correct designation for a structure drawing from the Moai tradition of Rapa Nui. Polynesian architecture spans an enormous geographic range and a variety of specific traditions, but the common threads include a relationship with natural materials, a tendency toward structures that are built to endure rather than to be easily modified, and an aesthetic that prioritizes the presence and solemnity of the object within its environment. A moai is not trying to disappear into its landscape, it is asserting its presence within that landscape, claiming space through scale and through the gravity of the stone. Squidward's house does the same thing on Conch Street, in proportion to the suburban context of Bikini Bottom rather than the open hillsides of Rapa Nui, but with the same fundamental relationship between the structure and the space around it. The spiral staircase that connects the floors is a detail that sits at a slight tension with the volcanic rock construction. Spiral staircases in stone buildings are not impossible, but they require a specific kind of engineering, a central column around which the steps wind, each step cantilevered outward from that column or supported by the curved wall of the surrounding shaft. In a stone house, this is achievable, but not simple. The staircase in Squidward's house functions visually as the elegant interior counterpart to the imposing exterior, the point at which the stone building reveals a more refined interior intention. Going up the spiral staircase from the ground floor to the upper level is passing from the practical to the private in a way that the architecture marks clearly. The stairs are where the transition happens. The elevator, operating alongside the staircase, in the earlier seasons of the show particularly, is harder to explain in terms of the volcanic rock construction. Elevators require a shaft, a mechanical system of pulleys or hydraulics, and a continuous power source. None of these requirements are addressed by the show, which is consistent with how the show treats most of its own infrastructure. Electricity in Bikini Bottom, plumbing, the mechanisms by which an underwater city maintains breathable conditions, and fire-capable stoves, and operational televisions, these are not problems the show is interested in solving. They are assumed to be solved in whatever way makes the specific story of a given episode possible. The elevator goes up and down because there is an elevator, and that is what elevators do. What the volcanic rock construction does make legible is the sound profile of the house. Stone is a poor acoustic insulator. Sound travels through stone efficiently and reflects off hard stone surfaces rather than being absorbed. A house made of volcanic rock with stone walls and a stone ceiling would carry sound from room to room with more fidelity than a house built from softer materials. Squidward plays the clarinet in his gallery. The clarinet is an instrument that projects. In a stone house, that projection would bounce off the interior surfaces and carry further and more clearly than in any other kind of structure. When he opens the gallery window to practice, the stone itself amplifies the output before the sound ever reaches the street. This also means that sounds from outside enter the house with similar efficiency. SpongeBob's noise, Patrick's noise, the sounds of whatever is happening on Conch Street at any given moment, these would come through the volcanic rock walls more readily than through wood or insulated modern construction. The material that makes the house impressive and durable is the same material that makes it acoustically transparent in ways Squidward would not have chosen. The stone that holds his privacy in terms of visibility, the walls that cannot be seen through, does not hold his privacy in terms of sound. Everything the neighbors do finds its way in. Inside a moai with green wallpaper and pink tile floors, with a jacuzzi and a clamshell chandelier, and 49 dozen self-portraits hanging on red walls. The volcanic rock surrounds all of it with the quiet density of something that was built long before any of the contents arrived. The house is older than the jazz records and the bamboo furniture. It is older than the spiral staircase and the elevator and the alarm clocks in the closet. The rock was there first. Everything Squidward has placed inside it, every object and every room arrangement and every deliberate aesthetic choice, exists within a cavity carved from stone that carries the shape of an ancestor figure and the weight of a geological event that happened before Squidward, or SpongeBob, or anyone on Conch Street was born. The house holds all of it, quietly, heavily, in volcanic rock, the way a moai holds the thing placed inside it, present, permanent, looking out at the street with an expression that has not changed in thousands of years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The construction explains the weight and the shape, and what the walls are made of, what those walls do to the character living inside them, how the house became a mirror of Squidward himself, rather than simply a shelter he happened to occupy, is where the house stops being a building and becomes something else entirely. Section 6. The house as the character. Octopuses have large heads. That is the biological fact Stephen Hillenburg was working from when he designed Squidward. Hillenburg had taught marine biology before moving into animation, and when he set about creating the grumpy neighbor who would live between SpongeBob and Patrick, he reached for the octopus specifically because of how the species looks. An octopus has what Hillenburg described as a large, bulbous head, and he wanted a character who considers himself an intellectual to carry that shape visually. The character's self-image and the character's physical form would be in direct conversation. Someone who thinks of himself as smarter and more cultured than the world around him should look like he has the cranial space to support that opinion. The name went in a different direction from the design. Squidward is named after the squid, a related but distinct creature, because Hillenburg and his collaborators liked how the name sounded. Squidward is phonetically satisfying in a way that Octward, or something built on octopus, would not be. The name stuck, the species was octopus, and the contradiction became one of the show's many quiet jokes about the gap between what a thing is called and what it actually is. Squidward the octopus lives in a moai, which the show calls an Easter Island head. The moai is not from Easter Island, in the sense that the island is called Rapa Nui by the people who built it, and Easter Island is the European name applied later. Even the naming layer of the house operates on the same principle as the character, called one thing, actually another, and not particularly concerned about the discrepancy. The physical connection between Squidward's body and his house is close enough to be deliberate. Both are dominated by a large head. Both have a prominent, defined nose. Both present a face to the world that reads as slightly severe, mildly disapproving, carrying an expression that communicates something about the interior life of the object without offering easy access to it. Squidward looks like his house. The house looks like Squidward. Whether this is because Squidward chose a house that mirrored his own appearance, or because the house shaped the person who grew up inside it, or because the show's creators designed them as a matched pair from the beginning, the result is the same. Standing outside 122 Conch Street and looking at the face of the moai is not entirely unlike looking at Squidward himself, scaled up and made of stone, planted in the sand with the permanence of something that has no intention of moving. One published joke about the house, appearing in a Nickelodeon book called Bottoms Up, suggests that Squidward bought the house so he could get ahead. That is a pun on ahead, the sense of gaining an advantage, or getting out in front of something, and the fact that the house is literally a large stone head. The joke is cheap, in the way only a pun can be cheap, but it gestures at something the show takes more seriously. Squidward having a head, in the sense of a house shaped like one, is a visible claim about who he is relative to his surroundings. The head stands above the rock, and the pineapple on either side of it. The head is tall and stone, and present in a way that demands acknowledgement. The three houses on Conch Street have been read by some observers as a kind of map of character types placed into architectural form. The pineapple is bright and organic and tropical, full of warmth and color, the residence of someone whose relationship with the world is fundamentally enthusiastic. The rock is flat and generic, providing shelter without any aesthetic statement, appropriate for someone who has no aesthetic vocabulary to draw on. The moai sits between them as something categorically different from both. Stone rather than organic, carved rather than natural, ancient rather than contemporary, serious rather than cheerful or oblivious. The house in the middle makes a claim that neither neighbor's house makes, that the person inside has considered how they want to present themselves to the world and has aligned their dwelling with that consideration. Squidward is a character who wants to be seen as significant. The frustration at the core of the character, the thing that makes him perpetually aggrieved, rather than simply grumpy, is the gap between how he sees himself and how the world around him responds to that self-image. He considers himself a serious artist and a gifted musician. The show does not consistently validate those claims. His clarinet playing is frequently described by other characters as terrible. His paintings are rejected and mocked, with one memorable moment in which a gallery display of his work receives the response that the painting labeled bold and brash belongs in the trash rather than on the wall. The world of Bikini Bottom does not see what Squidward sees when he looks in the mirror. The house is the one place where the world confirms his self-image rather than refuting it. The house is undeniably significant. The Moai shape carries centuries of genuine cultural weight, built by a civilization that created something extraordinary under conditions of extreme isolation. When Squidward refers to his home as his Easter Island head in the episode SB-129, there is no irony in his voice. He is not being self-deprecating. He lives in a thing that commands respect, and the neighborhood acknowledges this every time anyone looks at Conch Street from outside. The rock is a rock. The pineapple is a pineapple. The Moai is a monument. His neighbors' houses also reflect them with accuracy, but in a different register. SpongeBob's pineapple is a foreign object that washed into the ocean from somewhere else, bright and sweet and impossible to ignore, exactly like its occupant. Patrick's rock requires no ornamentation and makes no claims. Patrick Star lives under a rock in the most literal possible sense, and the house does not try to be anything other than what it is. Squidward's house is the only one of the three that was made deliberately, carved to a specific form by a specific intention. The pineapple grew, the rock was already there. Someone shaped the Moai on purpose. That intentionality is part of what the house reflects about the character. Squidward is the only one of the three neighbors who thinks carefully about how things should be done. He has opinions about music, and art, and food, and domestic arrangement. His house has an art studio and a library. His dining room has a chandelier. His living room has jazz records. These are the choices of someone who has spent time deciding how a life should be arranged, what should be in a kitchen, and what should hang on a wall, and what kind of light should fall on a dinner table. The house is the product of that sustained attention to preference, the physical accumulation of all the decisions Squidward has made about how he wants to live, when no external requirements are being placed on him. Patrick's house has no art studio, because Patrick has no art practice. SpongeBob's pineapple has a room for his jellyfish nets, and a place for Gary's food bowl, and the domestic equipment of his own particular life. Each house fits its occupant, not through some magical correspondence, but because a house is where a person puts things, and what people put in their houses, and how they arrange those things, is a record of who they are. Squidward put 492 self-portraits in the gallery. He put 58 alarm clocks in the closet. He put a clamshell chandelier over the dining room table. The house holds all of that, and what it holds is a portrait of Squidward, assembled from objects rather than from paint. The gallery full of self-portraits is where this reading of the house becomes most direct. An artist who paints themselves nearly 500 times is conducting an extended inquiry into something, returning to the same question from different angles, using different styles and different media and different framings to get closer to an answer about the face, looking back from the canvas. Squidward's self-portraits span from realistic to wildly abstract, from straightforward representation to clown costume, to something that echoes Van Gogh. The range of approaches suggests genuine artistic engagement rather than simple narcissism. A vain person paints themselves in the most flattering possible light, repeatedly, to the same end. An artist paints themselves in every possible light to understand what is actually there. The house contains that inquiry. The studio with red walls and a white floor is the space built specifically to hold it, the room whose purpose is Squidward looking at Squidward and trying to understand what he sees. The bedroom next door, where he sleeps with the clarinet, is the space where the looking stops for the night. These two rooms, connected to each other and accessible only from within the deeper interior of the house, form the core of the private life that the exterior stone face of the Moai protects. A detail from the episode Home Away from Home adds another dimension to the relationship between the house and the character. In that episode, the houses on Conch Street are given names when they become sentient and interact as characters. Squidward's house is named Tiki. The show notes this naming as a slight misnomer. because a tiki is a different kind of Polynesian carved figure from a moai, and the house is specifically a moai. The parallel is drawn directly. Tiki is named after the wrong kind of Polynesian figure, just as Squidward is named after the wrong kind of cephalopod. The house and the character share the condition of being called something that does not precisely match what they actually are. Being named inaccurately, and being what you actually are regardless of that name, is a specific kind of condition. It places the truth of the thing at a slight distance from its label, requiring anyone who cares about precision to look past the name to what is actually in front of them. Squidward is an octopus, regardless of the squid in his name. The house is a moai, regardless of being called tiki. The gap between label and reality is not distressing in either case. It simply is the situation, absorbed without drama, continued without correction. Squidward has presumably known his whole life that his name implies a different animal than the one he is. The house has presumably always been a moai, regardless of whatever people choose to call it. There is also the placement of the house within the street to consider. Being in the middle is a specific position. It requires facing in one direction while having neighbors on both sides, never being at an end, where at least one flank is exposed only to open space. Squidward's house looks straight ahead at the street and the ocean beyond, while SpongeBob's presence presses in from one side and Patrick's from the other. The house has no choice about this. It was already between them when the series began, and it has remained there. The stone face looks forward, because that is what moai faces do, but the position on the street means that looking forward is the only direction that does not involve a neighbor. The moai of Easter Island mostly face inland, toward the communities they were built to protect, their backs to the ocean they cross to reach the island. Squidward's house faces outward, toward the street, and whatever open water lies beyond Bikini Bottom. It faces away from what it protects, which in this case is not a community, but a single occupant, and his clarinet, and his 492 paintings. The ancestor figures of Rapa Nui watched over the living. Squidward's house watches over Squidward, turned toward the world outside, rather than toward the one person inside it, maintaining the outward-facing solemnity of the form, while the life it shelters happens at its back. The house cannot be separated from the character, not because the show insists on that connection, but because the design makes it inevitable. Every element of the exterior, the face, the color, the height, the placement, mirrors something in the person living inside it. The interior confirms what the exterior implies. The rooms are the choices are the character. The volcanic rock holds it all together, and the stone face looks out at the street with the expression it has always had, unchanged across the show's entire run, meeting the world with the particular gravity of something that was carved to last. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The house reflects Squidward in the way a very good portrait reflects its subject, capturing something true about the person, without requiring the person to explain themselves. But the house is not always a passive reflection. On certain occasions across the series, it stops reflecting and starts acting, and what it does when it acts is considerably harder to explain. Section 7. When the house wakes up, Squidward's house reacts to things. The show never explains the mechanism behind this, never dedicates an episode to establishing whether the building is conscious or simply expressive, but across the series the moai is treated as something more than an inert structure. It has a face, and the show uses that face, the building registering events on the street outside and in the rooms within, in ways that a regular building would not. A rock can sit in a yard for 1,000,000 years without anyone seriously entertaining the possibility that it has opinions about the situation. A pineapple can grow, ripen, and decay without ever generating the sense that it is watching what happens around it. A face is different. A face implies interiority. Once the eyes and nose and mouth are in place, the question of what is happening behind them becomes genuinely open. The moai at 122 Conch Street has had a face since the first episode, and that face has always read as expressive in a way that went slightly beyond the passive. The brow communicates. The compressed mouth communicates. The expression holds something. For most of the show's run, that something stays sealed inside the stone, contained and visible only to anyone paying close attention in the background of a scene. On certain episodes, it does not stay contained. the first small signs appear before any full activation of the house. These are blink-and-miss moments, background details that reward careful watching without demanding it. In one episode, during a scene taking place outside the houses on Conch Street, Patrick has a box. The box is a recurring object in that particular episode, the contents of which SpongeBob is desperate to see. While the two of them manage the situation outside, Squidward's house leans. The whole structure tilts in the direction of the box, the stone body bending slightly toward the secret container, with the unmistakable posture of something trying to get a better look at something it is not supposed to see. When SpongeBob and Patrick notice the house doing this, it straightens again, returning to its upright position with the deliberate casualness of something pretending it was never moving at all. The house, caught peeking, resumes its pose of dignified neutrality. The episode moves on, the moment is not discussed. In another episode, the sustained loud crying that SpongeBob produces outdoors eventually crosses whatever threshold the house requires to respond. The stone face contorts. The brow pulls down into something that reads as open frustration, the expression shifting from its baseline of settled displeasure into active distress. Arms form from the stone of the building and rise to cover the ear-level windows, which in this context function as actual ears being covered to block the sound. The house makes an angry face at SpongeBob's crying, in the way anyone nearby might make an angry face at an unbearable noise, except that the face belongs to a stone building, and the arms raised to cover its ears were not there a moment before. The episode does not pause to explain this. The house is covering its ears. This is a thing that is happening. These early appearances share a quality of restraint. The house reacts, but its reactions are proportionate to the stimulus, and brief in duration, a lean to see something interesting. A wince, and a hand over the ears, during something painful. These are the reflexes of something with a nervous system that is mostly dormant, producing small involuntary responses to sufficiently intense stimulation without fully coming online. The house is not speaking. It is not making decisions. It is not autonomous. It is doing what a face does when something happens nearby, registering the event in the only language available to it, which is expression. The episode that changes the scale of all of this is the Season 4 installment titled Good Neighbors. What happens in that episode begins with Squidward's Sunday, which is the one day of the week on which the Krusty Krab is closed, and Squidward has no professional obligation to be anywhere or do anything for anyone. Sunday is the day he wants to spend in his house, undisturbed, existing in the quiet domestic arrangement he has constructed for himself and which his neighbors reliably destroy. In this particular Sunday, after a series of intrusions by SpongeBob and Patrick that the episode documents with its usual patient escalation, Squidward finds an advertisement in his newspaper for a product called the Security System 5000. The Security System 5000 is described as a monitoring device capable of detecting threats and responding to them, keeping the home safe from whatever the owner designates as unwanted. Squidward has it installed. The installation is presented as free and swift, the system mounted inside the house quickly and without complication. What follows is a sequence that proceeds from Squidward's attempt to use the system to remove SpongeBob and Patrick from his property. The system scans them and announces no threat detected. Squidward, frustrated, hits the machine. The machine registers Squidward himself as a threat in response to being struck. This determination triggers what the system classifies as a code red situation, which is the highest level of alert the machine is capable of processing. At code red, the Security System 5000 does not simply lock the doors or sound an alarm. It takes control. The house wakes up. The activation that follows is not the subtle lean or the briefly covered ears of the earlier episodes. The house grows robot limbs. Mechanical arms and legs extend from the stone structure, the moai shape rising above the seafloor on a framework of machinery that the security system has either constructed or revealed from within the existing architecture of the building. The house kicks Squidward out of itself first, ejecting the owner before beginning its rampage, which is a detail that the show does not emphasize but which has a certain logic to it. The security system detected Squidward as a threat. The house is now protecting itself from its owner. Squidward, evicted from his own home by a machine he installed specifically to give himself more control over his environment, watches from the street as the structure he lives in begins destroying the city. The destruction is extensive. Bikini Bottom burns. Water from Goo Lagoon floods the surrounding area when the house drains it. Buildings throughout the city are damaged or destroyed by the mechanical limbs of an ambulatory moai that is making its way through the undersea suburb with the unhurried thoroughness of something that has decided. When military forces arrive to address the situation, the house picks up a tank, holding the armored vehicle in its mechanical grip with the ease of something that has never experienced any object as too heavy to lift. The tank's operator escapes. The house continues. SpongeBob and Patrick are inside the house throughout most of this rampage. They entered during the confusion of the initial activation and have not been able to leave. They are passengers in the building while it wages war on the neighborhood. From inside the house, the rooms presumably function as they always have. The living room and the kitchen and the dining room unchanged in their arrangement, while the structure containing them walks around destroying things. Being inside a house that is in the process of committing civic catastrophe is not a situation the episode explores from SpongeBob and Patrick's subjective experience. They are simply in there, while out there, Squidward watches and the city suffers. The resolution of the episode involves SpongeBob's house being disguised as a female moai, a costume constructed from available materials and animated through a microphone and speaker that SpongeBob operates from inside the disguise. The security system 5000, apparently, has given the house enough autonomous processing to be susceptible to this approach. Squidward's house, confronted with what appears to be another moai figure presenting itself in a particular way, responds. It moves toward the disguised pineapple. It sits back down in its original position on Conch Street. The switch in the backyard is flipped, deactivating the system, and the house returns to its standard inert condition, stone and still, looking out at the street with its usual expression. The aftermath lands entirely on Squidward. The mayor of Bikini Bottom holds him responsible for the damage caused by his house, a determination that is presented as final and non-negotiable. Squidward is assigned community service every Sunday for the rest of his life. The one day that was his, the single calendar slot that belonged entirely to him and his quiet domestic existence, is taken away as a consequence of installing a security system he believed would protect his right to that quiet. The house destroyed the city, and Squidward pays the bill. The house returned to its baseline position on Conch Street. Everything is where it was, except for Squidward's Sundays. The personality the house displays during the Good Neighbors episode is not easily reconciled with Squidward's own personality. Squidward is grumpy and self-protective, but he is not violent. He does not walk through Bikini Bottom destroying buildings. His grievances are real, but his responses to them are scaled to the suburban context. The house, given autonomy through the security system, operates without any of those constraints. It scales its response to whatever the security system calculates a code-red situation demands, which turns out to be essentially unlimited. The house activated by the security system 5000 is not Squidward amplified. It is something else operating inside Squidward's building, something that uses the face and the stone and the address on Conch Street, but acts from a different interior. A Nick Magazine comic strip called House of Squidward returns to the same territory through a different mechanism. In this version, a switch buried in the backyard of the property activates the house when thrown, bringing it to life independently of any installed security system. When activated this way, the house declares that it has been waiting to be reawakened, framing its previous dormancy as a period of patient anticipation rather than mere inactivity. Given autonomy, it behaves badly. It destroys the Krusty Krab to obtain food. It corners Plankton and forces him to serve as a source of provisions. It drains Goo Lagoon, causing the flooding that results in large numbers of Bikini Bottom residents being caught in the wave. The resolution again involves tricking the house, using SpongeBob's disguised pineapple to distract it long enough to flip the switch and return it to dormancy. The house's declaration upon activation that it has been waiting is the most interesting line it speaks in any of its active appearances, comic or animated. A thing that waits has expectations. A thing with expectations has something like desire, a model of what it would like to happen, and an awareness that the current situation falls short of that model. The house buried in the backyard is not nothing between activations. It is waiting. For what the comic does not specify, but the eagerness of the reawakening suggests that whatever it is waiting for, the chance to be mobile and autonomous and uncontained by the requirements of functioning as a domestic structure, has been the preoccupation of its dormant state for however long the switch has been unthrown. The episode Home Away from Home presents a version of the house's sentience that operates in an entirely different moral register from the rampaging destructor of Good Neighbors and House of Squidward. In this episode, the three houses on Conch Street become sentient and interact as characters, each given a name for the duration. Squidward's house is called Tiki, SpongeBob's house is called Piney, Patrick's house is called Rocky. Rocky is in some kind of distress and needs rescuing. Tiki and Piney work together to save Rocky, the two houses becoming collaborators in a small adventure that takes them away from Conch Street and back again. Tiki in this episode is voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson, a choice that gives the house a different quality from the Roger Bumpass and Tom Kenny voicing used in its more antagonistic appearances. The character that results is warm, capable, oriented toward others in a way that the house during the Good Neighbors rampage clearly is not. Tiki is a protagonist. Tiki forms a friendship with Piney. Tiki goes out of its way to help Rocky despite whatever inconvenience or difficulty that involves. The house that burned Bikini Bottom is the same house that rescues a rock in trouble, and the show treats both as valid versions of what the building is capable of. Other moments of sentience are smaller and more domestic. When Mr. Krabs breaks into the house one night and steals food from the kitchen to feed his daughter Pearl, the house responds afterward by remarking that it needed to lose a little weight anyway, a comment delivered without apparent distress, accepting the loss with more equanimity than Squidward himself does when he learns what happened. The house is, in this instance, less bothered than its occupant. Squidward tries to report the theft. The house has already made its peace with it. In the episode featuring a sea bunny, the house coughs and screams when a fire breaks out inside it, because Squidward left something in the oven. Being on fire produces a reaction. The reaction is communicative, rather than defensive. The house does not put itself out. It announces that it is on fire, and then continues being on fire until the situation resolves by other means. The house's capacity for sentience, distributed across episodes in varying intensities and moral orientations, does not settle into a consistent portrait of a single character with continuous memory and stable preferences. The house that waits in the backyard, and the house that rescues Rocky, and the house that covers its ears during SpongeBob's crying, are all the same building, and all somewhat different entities, their behavior shaped by whatever the specific episode requires. What remains constant is the face, the stone face that looks out at the street, that carries the same expression across every episode regardless of what is happening inside or around it, is the consistent element. The personality behind it changes. The face does not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The house wakes up only rarely, and returns to stillness each time, resuming its position on Conch Street, with the face unchanged and the stone settled back into the sand. What happens when the house is destroyed, which occurs far more often than it wakes up, is a different kind of story entirely. Section 8. Everything that has ever destroyed it. Getting Squidward's house destroyed turns out to be surprisingly easy. The very first destruction happens in only the second episode the show ever aired. SpongeBob learns how to blow bubbles at a stand he sets up in the front yard, and after some back and forth, Squidward tries it himself and produces a bubble large enough to swallow the entire moai. The house gets lifted off the seafloor inside the bubble, carried upward, and then dropped when the bubble bursts. The impact drives the house crown first into the sand, inverting the whole structure so the base points upward and the face of the statue is buried. The house is upside down in the ground. Squidward is inside it. The show is 2 episodes old, and the house has already been flipped into the seafloor. What follows across the rest of the series is one of the longest lists of property damage in cartoon history. The house gets exploded, burned, chewed to gravel, vacuumed apart, flipped upside down, dropped into volcanoes, sacrificed to a geological event by its own neighborhood, and destroyed by an indoor golf game. None of this ever sticks. Every destruction is followed by a full reset. The house back on Conch Street, in perfect condition by the next episode. The volcanic rock reassembled, and the green wallpaper, and the clamshell chandelier, and all 58 alarm clocks returned to their places, as if nothing happened. The show never explains the rebuilding. The house simply comes back, the stone face looking out at the street with the same expression it always has, every single time. Some destructions arrive directly from the neighbors, which is where a significant portion of them originate. In the episode called Naughty Nautical Neighbors, SpongeBob and Patrick pass bubble messages back and forth through the walls of the house while Squidward is inside. The carbon dioxide from the bubbles builds up inside the stone structure. Eventually the pressure exceeds what the volcanic rock can contain, and the house explodes outward. One of the hardest and most durable construction materials in the natural world, compressed volcanic ash formed under geological pressure over thousands of years, is defeated by too many bubble messages from two neighbors who were just trying to communicate. Sandy's rocket sends SpongeBob and Patrick on an alien hunt, during which they become convinced Squidward is an extraterrestrial. Their method of trying to capture him involves grabbing the house and shaking it hard enough to significantly damage the interior. Squidward, who is simply an octopus in his own home on a quiet evening, has his house damaged because two neighbors decided he was a space creature and acted accordingly. The episode does not treat this as unusual behavior on their part. They found an alien and pursued it with reasonable commitment to the mission as they understood it. The episode called House Fancy deserves its own detailed account, because the destruction it produces is especially elaborate and arrives through its own chain of events. Squidward, watching a television program about fancy homes, calls in and claims his house is fancier than his lifelong rival Squilliam Fancyson's, which brings the television crew over within 2 hours. SpongeBob volunteers to help get the place ready. He is given paint to cover a faded patch on one wall and covers the entire room instead, deciding it all looked faded. He is then asked to help move a piece of furniture and injures Squidward's foot in the process several times, destroying the furniture along the way. Given a vacuum cleaner to clean up the resulting mess while Squidward tends to his injury, SpongeBob adds extra power to the machine and gets sucked inside it. The vacuum, now running at full capacity with SpongeBob trapped inside, consumes the contents of the house, room by room, until it explodes, taking everything with it. The television crew arrives to find rubble. The host of the program looks at the destruction and decides it is a brilliant work of abstract art, declaring Squidward the winner of the entire competition. The house gets demolished in preparation for a home decoration contest and wins the contest by being demolished. Fire takes the house in the episode called Squid's Visit. SpongeBob, desperate for Squidward to come over and visit, steals his vacuum cleaner, which gives Squidward a reason to go retrieve it. While Squidward is gone, a casserole he left in the oven continues cooking unattended in an empty house. The oven runs in the volcanic rock shell, with no one to check on it. The casserole burns, the fire spreads, the house catches and collapses entirely, while Squidward sits in SpongeBob's house, which has been remodeled as an exact replica of the Moai interior, surrounded by copies of his belongings, slowly realizing what has happened to the originals back on Conch Street. The house burns down in his absence because of his own cooking, while he is sitting in a reproduction of it somewhere else. Patrick Star, declared king of Bikini Bottom in the episode called Rule of Dumb on the basis of a mistaken genealogical record, decides he wants a Ferris wheel built for his personal use. The Ferris wheel requires the ground currently occupied by Squidward's house. King Patrick's approach to this problem is to have the house relocated to clear the space. The interior is destroyed during the move, and the structure is dropped into the ground at an angle that leaves it partially buried and unusable. Squidward's home is taken apart and dropped into the ground as a direct result of Patrick being briefly handed political authority over the neighborhood and having immediate access to construction resources. Patrick's sister Sam arrives in the episode called Big Sister Sam and handles Squidward's house the same way she handles most things in her path. She removes pieces of the building, chews those pieces into small rock fragments, and blows them outward with force. The volcanic rock that the show's companion book specifies as the construction material is chewed apart by a visiting starfish and expelled as gravel across the street. Sam has no specific problem with the house or with Squidward. The house is in her way, and she removes it in the most direct manner available to her. Trading the house away is how the loss happens in the episode called The Paper. SpongeBob has a piece of paper that he is getting an enormous amount of enjoyment from, and Squidward becomes convinced he can get more out of that same piece of paper than SpongeBob can. He offers trades in exchange for it. The trades escalate piece by piece, furniture first, then fixtures, then the structural elements of the building itself, until the ground beneath the house is gone, and Squidward is sitting on the seafloor with only the stone exterior frame of the moai around him. The form of the house survives. Everything that made it a home is gone. Squidward traded his house away for a piece of paper and lost the competition with SpongeBob for what to do with it anyway. Losing the house without any physical destruction at all happens in the episode called Can You Spare a Dime, when Squidward quits the Krusty Krab and cannot afford to pay for the house anymore. The building is completely undamaged, standing in its correct location on Conch Street, fully intact. Squidward simply cannot return to it because he cannot cover the cost. He ends up living in SpongeBob's house for much of the episode's central situation. This is a different kind of house loss from all the explosions and fires and chewing. The house is fine. The problem is entirely financial. In the episode called Sponge Kano, a broken water pipe lands on a nearby volcano, and the citizens of Bikini Bottom decide the situation requires a sacrifice to the volcano to restore geological calm. Their collective answer to what to sacrifice is Squidward's house. The community picks up the moai and delivers it to the volcano as an offering. Squidward's house, built from volcanic rock, is carried to a volcano and given to it by the neighbors who live near it as a community-organized geological gesture. The volcanic material of the house meets the active geological heat of a volcano. The show does not comment on this. The house disappears into the volcano. The next episode, it is back on Conch Street. The episode called Squidward has carrier clams drop the house into the volcanic structure of Mount Bikini Bottom. The drop is accidental rather than ceremonial, the clams releasing the building over the mountain rather than delivering it somewhere useful, but the result is similar to Sponge Kano. The house falls into a volcano. Two separate episodes send the moai into a volcanic structure by different means, one through community sacrifice and one through being dropped by birds, and in both cases the house returns to Conch Street unaffected by the volcanic encounter. Giant Squidward uses the house as equipment. When Squidward is accidentally enlarged to massive size, the citizens of Bikini Bottom develop a plan to catch him that involves removing the top of the moai and using it as a container to trap him. The building loses its crown to serve as hardware in an operation aimed at capturing the person who lives inside it. The house that was built to hold something important is converted into a tool for catching its own occupant. Squidward destroys the house himself in the episode called Muse-Bob Model Pants, which stands apart from most of the destruction list because the damage originates from the inside. The episode puts Squidward in a situation where he is compelled to paint SpongeBob rather than his usual subjects, and the sustained pressure of that redirected artistic energy builds until Squidward breaks completely. The breakdown lands on the house. The occupant destroys the building, turning on the one space in his life where things are supposed to be on his terms. It is the same stone walls and the same green wallpaper and the same 58 alarm clocks, and he destroys all of it himself. Golf takes the house in the episode called A Friendly Game. SpongeBob and Patrick build an indoor golf course through the interior of the moai because the weather outside is not suitable for playing, routing the holes through the living spaces with enough sustained structural impact from the shots and the search for lost balls that the house is destroyed by the time the game concludes. The carefully maintained domestic space that Squidward keeps with deliberate attention, the furniture and the wallpaper and the records and the gallery, becomes the terrain for a golf course played by two people who do not live there and were not invited. A monster named Rarg, appearing in the episode called The Monster Who Came to Bikini Bottom, destroys the house through the basic logic of being a large monster moving through a neighborhood that was not designed to accommodate one. The destruction is a side effect of Rarg's presence rather than a deliberate act. The house is in the path of something large and does not survive the contact. This is the simplest version of the destruction pattern, an obstacle meeting a force too large to negotiate with, and it does not require any particular story setup beyond the monster being in Bikini Bottom and the house being on the street. A storm takes the house away in the episode called Mermaid Man Begins. No explosion, no fire, no chewing. The storm simply picks it up and removes it. Weather, in an underwater city, achieves what bubbles and golf and volcanoes and royal decrees achieve in other episodes: the removal of the moai from Conch Street by a force Squidward cannot control and did not invite. What connects every item on this list, and the list is longer than any summary can fully capture, is the recovery. Every single time, without exception, the house comes back. The volcanic rock reassembles between episodes, or is replaced by new stone of the same type and cut into the same shape. The wallpaper goes back on the walls. The chandelier returns above the dining table. The alarm clocks reappear in the closet. The canopy bed is back in the bedroom. The gallery wall holds the self-portraits again. Whatever agent of restoration operates in Bikini Bottom between episodes does so entirely off-screen, quietly returning a complete and undamaged 122 Conch Street to the space between the pineapple and the rock, without explanation and without comment from any character. This recovery is not a property of the stone. The show has demonstrated many times that volcanic rock is not indestructible. Sam Starr chewed it into gravel. The Sponge Kano volcano accepted it as an offering. A giant bubble inverted it into the seafloor in episode 2. The recovery is a property of how stories work in Bikini Bottom. The house is a recurring location, and recurring locations in an ongoing series cannot be permanently removed. The show destroys the house in one episode because it will restore it for the next. The destruction is a storytelling device, something to raise the stakes or deliver consequences within a specific episode, and the restoration is the equally necessary reset that makes the next story possible from the same starting point. The house gets destroyed because it can be. It comes back because it must be. What the entire list says about the house, across all those methods and all those seasons, is something the show lands on without intending to argue for it. The Moai, at 122 Conch Street, is the most repeatedly destroyed private residence in Bikini Bottom, and possibly in the history of animated television, and it is still there. Every Ferris wheel, and every golf tournament, and every king, and every monster, and every casserole fire, and every volcano has taken a turn at it. The face on the front has not changed. The address has not changed. The house comes back to the spot between the pineapple and the rock, stones settled into the sand, looking out at the street with the same expression it had before whatever just happened to it happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Next up, Squidward finds a neighborhood full of houses exactly like his, and discovers something unexpected about what that actually feels like. Section 9. Every house the same. The Tentacle Acres advertisement appears on Squidward's television at the exact moment he has nothing left. His house has just been destroyed. SpongeBob and Patrick received reef blowers in the mail, devices capable of generating powerful suction and equally powerful expulsion, and they brought them to Conch Street and used them on the Moai. The nose went first, then the windows, which are also the eyes, then the mouth door. Squidward, sealed inside a stone structure that now had no openings, dug his way out through the ground and demanded the parts be returned. SpongeBob and Patrick attempted to comply. The reef blowers, switched to blow, fired the nose and the windows and the door back at the house with a velocity that the volcanic rock could not absorb, and the structure came apart. The Moai, which has survived an extraordinary catalog of destruction events across the show's run, is reduced to rubble by its own face being shot back at it. Squidward sits in the debris. His television, somehow intact among the scattered stone, is playing. The advertisement for Tentacle Acres begins. The commercial's pitch opens with a series of questions that repeat back exactly what Squidward said in the seconds before it appeared, the copy reading as if it was written specifically for this moment. Is this the final straw? Do you want to move so far away that you can brag about it? Would you rather tear out your brainstem, walk out into the middle of the nearest four-way intersection, and skip rope with it, than continue living where you do now? Patrick, sitting among the rubble, changes the channel to static before the advertisement finishes. Squidward has already seen enough. Tentacle Acres, where happiness is just a suction cup away. The name on the episode's title card is Squidville, which is not what the community within the episode is actually called. The community is Tentacle Acres. The discrepancy between title and content is a small thing, a minor inconsistency of the kind the show produces often and without apparent concern, but it adds one more layer to the episode's general theme, which is the gap between what something is called and what it turns out to be. Tentacle Acres sounds like a promise. The episode is about what happens when the promise is kept precisely and completely and turns out not to be what was wanted after all. The gated community is built for octopuses. Entry requires being an octopus. The security system at the entrance is designed specifically to exclude sponges, starfish, and any other species that is not a cephalopod of the correct variety. Squidward, who has spent the entire run of the show to this point as the only member of his species on Conch Street, surrounded by a sponge and a starfish whose company he finds relentless and exhausting, arrives at a place where the gate itself enforces his preferences. Non-octopuses are structurally prevented from entering. The architecture of exclusion that Squidward has attempted to maintain through personality and door shutting is here built into the physical infrastructure of the neighborhood. The houses are all Easter Island heads. Every single residence in Tentacle Acres is a moai, identical in shape and color to the house at 122 Conch Street, differentiated only by the large numbers on the doors that allow residents to find their own front mouth among all the identical stone faces. Row after row of them, the same brow and the same nose and the same compressed mouth repeated across the entire community, the same expression multiplied until it fills the visual field completely. The face that Squidward lives alone with on Conch Street, the one that stands above the pineapple and the rock as the singular serious structure in a neighborhood of distinctive differences, is here the only option. There is no pineapple, there is no rock. There are only moai, identically spaced, identically colored, identically serious, all the way to the edge of the gated property. The residents match the houses. Every octopus in Tentacle Acres looks like Squidward, sounds like Squidward, and conducts a daily life that Squidward would recognize as his own. They ride bicycles. They attend an interpretive dance academy. They play clarinet in organized groups at the bandstand in the park. They shop at a health food store called Full of Health, which sells products including canned bread, a detail Squidward regards with genuine delight when he first encounters it. They are all pursuing the same cultural activities, with the same level of seriousness, in the same kind of house, in the same gated community, and they all look like Squidward doing it. SpongeBob and Patrick, who follow Squidward to Tentacle Acres to apologize for destroying his house, cannot find him. They approach octopus after octopus on the streets of the community, examining each face and determining it is not Squidward, before moving on to the next. Patrick, at one point, approaches a fire hydrant and addresses it directly, asking whether it is Squidward, and then adding, after a pause, that it's okay, take your time. SpongeBob and Patrick have known Squidward their entire lives. They cannot pick him out from a neighborhood of people who look exactly like him. The qualities they would normally use to identify Squidward, his voice, his build, his expression, the shape of his face, are shared by every resident of Tentacle Acres. Their inability to find him is not a failure of observation. It is a precise and accurate response to a situation in which Squidward has become indistinguishable from the community he has chosen. What Squidward finds in Tentacle Acres is initially everything he wanted. The mornings are quiet. The neighbors are engaged in activities he values. The community is organized around the pursuits he considers meaningful. He visits the dance academy. He rides through the park on a bicycle. He plays his clarinet at the bandstand, and is surrounded by others doing the same, the sound of multiple clarinets occupying the same space without anyone treating the music as an imposition. For the first stretch of his time in the community, Tentacle Acres delivers on every point of its advertisement. Happiness is, in the most literal possible sense, just a suction cup away. The unraveling begins somewhere in the quiet. Squidward sits on a bench in the park. He has done the things he came here to do. He has eaten canned bread and attended the dance academy and played clarinet without complaint from neighbors. The park bench receives him in the afternoon light, and he sits on it, and there is nothing pressing on him from any direction. No SpongeBob, no Patrick, no reef blower sucking the face off his house, just the park, and the benches, and the other octopuses going about their identical days in their identical moai, and Squidward in the middle of it, sitting with the quiet he has been pursuing the entire run of the show to this point. He hears a reef blower. Someone in the community is operating a reef blower, the same device that destroyed his house on Conch Street, and the sound of it reaches him on the bench. The association the sound carries, SpongeBob, the destruction, the particular texture of the most recent catastrophe before he left Conch Street, arrives with the acoustic signal. Squidward's face changes. He misses SpongeBob. The show does not linger on this moment, or explain it, or draw it out. It presents it simply, the sound of a reef blower and the expression on Squidward's face, and allows the implication to stand without commentary. The character who organized his entire residential existence around the project of getting away from SpongeBob SquarePants, who has articulated his desire to be free of his neighbor in terms as vivid as preferring to skip rope with his own brainstem than continue living next door, sits in the paradise he sought, and finds that the sound of the instrument of his house's destruction reminds him of what he left behind. He does not act on this feeling immediately. What he acts on is boredom, or something that functions like boredom in a person who has organized his identity around having refined and specific tastes. The days in Tentacle Acres are all the same. The canned bread is available every day. The dance academy runs every day. The clarinet performances at the bandstand happen every day. The other octopuses conduct their identical lives in their identical moai with identical consistency, and the sameness accumulates in a way that the actual variety of Conch Street, where the daily disasters arrive in different forms and from different directions, does not. Tentacle Acres is perfect, perfectly repetitive, perfectly consistent, perfectly, relentlessly itself every single day. Squidward finds a reef blower in the park. The show does not explain whose it is or how it got there. He uses it. He sucks up the toupee of a passing resident. He uses the suction on a passing resident's croquet mallet while the resident is leaning on it, causing the resident to fall. He finds the other octopuses at the bandstand and fires the reef blower at them, scattering the organized performance. He is using the same device that destroyed his house to disrupt a community that he joined specifically for its order and its values and its clarinet playing. The disruption is the point. He needs something to happen that he did not anticipate. He needs the day to break from its pattern in a direction he did not plan. He needs, on some level, the chaos he spent the episode escaping. The community responds. The octopuses of Tentacle Acres, who have shown themselves to be exact replicas of Squidward in appearance and interest, are also replicas of him in tolerance for disruption, which is to say they have none. The community corners him. A police officer hands him a list of complaints that has accumulated during the reef blower incident, the formal record of the community's response to a member who behaved in a way inconsistent with the ordered life of Tentacle Acres. The police officer also informs Squidward that he does not have to stay. It is a gated community, not a prison. The gate opens from the inside. He is free to leave. Squidward leaves. He mounts the reef blower, uses it as a rocket, and launches himself out of Tentacle Acres and back toward Conch Street. SpongeBob and Patrick are still inside the community at this point, still searching for him among the identical faces of the residents, still unable to distinguish their neighbor from the crowd. They watch him go without fully understanding what they are watching. They find their way out eventually, and return to Conch Street as well, where the house has been restored by the same silent mechanism that always restores it. The Moai is back at 122 Conch Street. Squidward is back at 122 Conch Street. The episode ends. What Tentacle Acres demonstrates about the house on Conch Street is best understood by spending a moment with what the identical Moai of that community meant while Squidward was living among them. The house at 122 Conch Street is, in architectural terms, the same as every house in Tentacle Acres. Same shape, same stone, same face, same colors, same eye windows and nose protrusion and mouth door. If Squidward's house were dropped into Tentacle Acres, it would be number 305 on New Life Street, or whichever number came next, indistinguishable from its neighbors, without the distinguishing plate on the door. The house that stands above the pineapple and the rock on Conch Street, as the one serious monument in a neighborhood of distinctive residences, is, in the context of a community of identical Moai, completely ordinary. The significance the house carries on Conch Street is entirely relational. The Moai means something specific because of what sits on either side of it. Remove the pineapple and the rock, and replace them with more Moai, and the meaning drains out of the architecture. The height that made it the tallest structure on the street means nothing in a neighborhood where every structure is the same height. The solemnity that read as a statement about refinement and seriousness, when measured against a pineapple and a rock, reads as simple conformity when measured against 100 other expressions of the same solemnity in the same stone. The house on Conch Street is significant because of its context. Tentacle Acres removes the context and reveals a structure that is, on its own terms, just a moai among moai. Squidward returns to the destroyed and rebuilt house on Conch Street, and the context is restored with it. The pineapple is on one side, the rock is on the other. The moai stands between them as the singular serious monument, the one carved and intentional thing in a row of organic and accidental forms. The expression on the stone face has not changed. The episode that just ended has not altered the house's relationship to its surroundings, or the meaning that relationship produces. Squidward is home. The episode is sometimes read as being about the loneliness of getting exactly what you want and finding it insufficient. That reading is accurate but incomplete. Tentacle Acres was not insufficient because it was bad. It was insufficient because it was too complete. A community of people who are exactly like Squidward, living in houses exactly like his, doing the things he values with the seriousness he brings to them, produces a world from which friction has been removed entirely. There is no SpongeBob there. There is also no need for Squidward there, no gap between what exists and what he could provide, no way for his particular configuration of taste and stubbornness and clarinet practice to distinguish itself from the identical configurations on either side of him. Tentacle Acres needed no one specifically. It needed an octopus and got Squidward, and could not tell the difference. Conch Street needs Squidward specifically. The street without him would be a pineapple and a rock, which is a fundamentally different kind of neighborhood than what exists with the moai between them. SpongeBob needs Squidward next door, in the way that he needs the neighborhood to have texture, a point of resistance and complexity, someone who responds to the world differently and from a different set of values, and makes the street into a place where different kinds of life happen in proximity. Patrick needs Squidward in whatever way Patrick needs anything, which is more instinctual than articulable. The house needs the pineapple and the rock to be what it is on that street. The context makes the monument. Squidward understands this, or something close to it, not as an articulated thought, but as the physical fact of returning to Conch Street, when he could have stayed in a place that offered him everything he believed he wanted. He comes back. The house is there. The neighbors are somewhere nearby, still confused about what just happened, but cheerful about it in the way they are cheerful about everything. The street resumes. The face on the moai looks out at whatever is in front of it. 122 Conch Street is occupied again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Back on Conch Street, the house carries a different weight entirely, one that comes partly from what surrounds it, and partly from the many ways the building refuses to be perfectly consistent with itself. Section 10. The map that keeps changing Squidward's house does not have a consistent floor plan. Real houses stay put. The bathroom is where it was yesterday. The bedroom is on the same floor it was last year. A person who has lived somewhere long enough can find every room in the dark without thinking about it, because nothing has moved and nothing is going to move. Squidward's house works differently. The rooms shift between episodes without explanation. The bathroom appears on the first floor sometimes, and the second floor other times. The self-portraits documented as hanging in the upstairs gallery in certain episodes show up on the ground floor living room walls in others. The kitchen, which in the settled layout sits at the back of the ground floor, appears in at least one episode in what sources describe as an unknown room on an unknown floor. The house on Conch Street is not a fixed space. It is a collection of rooms that reassemble themselves around whatever the story needs that week, arriving where the narrative requires them and departing just as quietly when it does not. The most significant single inconsistency in the house's documented history occurs in the first season, in the episode called Plankton. SpongeBob, operating under Plankton's mind control, breaks through the walls of the moai in search of the Krusty Krab formula. When he enters what the episode presents as the interior, the bedroom is on the first floor. In every other episode in which the bedroom appears or is referenced, it sits on the second floor, in the left ear of the moai, behind the left eye window. The first floor bedroom appears in this one episode, and is never accounted for or referenced again. The second floor layout resumes in the next episode, as if the ground level bedroom had never occurred. That same episode also presents the house as having a single floor, the only instance in the entire run of the show in which the second floor does not exist at all. The staircase and the elevator and the gallery and the library and the upper bathroom, all absent in this episode, replaced by a single-story interior with a bedroom at ground level. The show never returns to that version. Production of a long-running animated series involves rotating teams of background artists, layout designers, writers, and directors who do not all work from identical reference materials and do not share perfectly identical understandings of what any recurring location contains. According to production accounts from people who worked on SpongeBob SquarePants across its run, the series developed across successive showrunner eras, with different creative emphases and different staff compositions. Steven Hillenburg was directly involved in the early seasons, stepped back after the first film in 2004, and returned to a more active role later. Paul Tibbitt ran the show for a substantial stretch in between. Vincent Waller and Mark Ceccarelli took over as showrunners, and have continued through the current period of the show's production. Each era brought different teams of storyboard artists, background painters, and layout supervisors, each working from their own understanding of what the locations look like and what they contain. A background artist rendering Squidward's living room in a later season may have different reference than the one who rendered it in Season 2. When story requirements occasionally put rooms in positions the established layout would not support, the story's requirements tend to win. SpongeBob SquarePants has been running for more than 27 years across 15 seasons as of its current production state, making it one of the longest-running animated series in American television history and the longest-running on Nickelodeon. Maintaining a precise and consistent floor plan for a recurring location across that production span, with all the staff changes and parallel episode production and multiple simultaneous spin-offs that an operation of that scale involves, would require a level of documentation and active cross-referencing that few animated productions sustain perfectly across their entire histories. Recurring locations in long-running animation drift incrementally over time, reflecting the accumulated decisions of many different people who each drew those spaces from their own understanding of them. The interior of Squidward's house shows this drift clearly across its documented record. The broad outlines are consistent. The specific details are not always. Something worth noting occurs at the street level in several specific episodes. The moai does not appear between the pineapple and the rock. Both neighboring houses are present in those shots, in their established positions on Conch Street, with the gap between them empty of the stone face that should be there. Sources document this occurring across at least 8 separate episodes in different seasons, among them the episodes called The Secret Box, Missing Identity, Gone, Growth Spout, A Pal for Gary, In Spongiac, Drive Happy, and Patrick the Mailman. Squidward is not homeless in any of them. No story event has removed the building. The production simply did not render the moai in the background of those particular shots, and the show proceeded as if the house was present whether or not the camera confirmed it. These absences exist in the record, discovered by viewers watching closely enough to track what sits in the background of scenes set near Conch Street. What those absences reveal is something specific about how the building functions within the show's production logic. The house is rendered when its presence is actively required by the scene being drawn. When the story is happening in the general vicinity of Conch Street, but not at or inside the moai, the building's appearance in the background is a lower priority than the elements the shot actually needs. The narrative does not require it visible, so it is not always visible. Real buildings remain standing whether or not any story requires them in a given frame. Cartoon buildings are present when the production assigns them to the shot, and absent when it does not. The house exists most completely in the episodes centered around it, and exists as a lighter presence in everything else, a location available when called upon, rather than a physical object maintaining continuous presence in the world, whether observed or not. A specific change occurs in the exterior in the early episodes. When the show begins, the mouth of the moai is closed, a carved stone feature, and a conventional door sits beneath the chin below the closed mouth, separate from it. The mouth and the door are 2 distinct elements of the facade. At some point in the opening run, this changes. The mouth opens and becomes the entrance itself, the door moving into the parted stone lips so that entering the house means passing through the opened mouth of the face. The change happens without any episode acknowledging it, without renovation or explanation, without Squidward being shown commissioning any modification. The earlier version exists in the early record, and then the later version replaces it, and the series continues on the basis of the new arrangement. Design revision in a show's early period is common. A closed stone mouth with a separate door below it is accurate to the moai form in a narrow sense, but it creates a visual configuration that requires explaining every time the house appears in a shot. An open mouth functioning directly as the entrance is more readable and more coherent as recurring visual shorthand. Every time the door opens, the face of the building opens with it. The two actions are the same action. The logic is clean, in a way the earlier version's logic was not, and cleaner logic serves a recurring cartoon location better over thousands of appearances than accurate but awkward does. The brief inconsistency between the early version and the settled one is the standard cost of a production finding its way to the version of something that actually works. Copies and partial versions of the house appear across the run without the original being affected by their existence. In the episode Keep Bikini Bottom Beautiful, SpongeBob constructs a garbage version of the moai from collected refuse, and this version ends up built underneath the actual house, a refuse replica occupying the space below the original stone structure so that both exist simultaneously in that episode, the real house above and the garbage one below. In shell games, a character named Tony uses the house as his shell for the duration of that episode, treating the moai as a portable dwelling in the way a hermit crab treats a shell of appropriate size. A sand sculpture version appears in at least one other episode, shaped like the moai, without sharing its material or permanence. Each of these copies is surface rather than substance. None of them contains the gallery or the library or the dining room with the clamshell chandelier. The duplicates reproduce the face without the rooms behind it, the exterior shape without the domestic interior that gives the exterior its meaning. They confirm that the shape of the house is recognizable enough to be replicated in garbage, sand, and shell logic, while the interior is too specifically Squidward's to appear in any copy. Measuring the visible exterior and attempting to derive the interior layout from those dimensions does not produce a result that resolves cleanly. The moai shape provides a bounded volume defined by its walls and overall proportions. 2 floors within that volume, each containing multiple rooms, along with the staircase, the elevator, both bathrooms, the gallery, the library, the back room, and the main ground floor living spaces, requires an interior geometry that exceeds what the exterior walls could physically contain. A gallery holding 492 self-portraits requires significant continuous wall surface. A bedroom with a full canopy bed requires meaningful floor area with clearance on multiple sides. A living room that functions as a social space requires enough square footage to arrange its furniture in a workable configuration. Fitting all of that inside a stone moai, with walls thick enough to hold the exterior form together, is not a problem that resolves geometrically. It resolves cartoonily. Interior spaces in Bikini Bottom are consistently larger than their exterior volumes should allow. SpongeBob's pineapple contains rooms whose dimensions exceed what the fruit's exterior would hold. Patrick's rock covers underground rooms that expand and contract between episodes according to what the story requires beneath them. The Krusty Krab varies in interior scale depending on whether the episode needs a small restaurant or a large commercial kitchen with corridor access. Sandy's tree dome contains more tree than its dome could physically accommodate. None of these spaces maintain strict dimensional fidelity across their entire production runs. The inside is as large as the story inside it needs to be, and the outside is a shape that establishes the location visually without governing what the location contains. The cartoon exterior and the cartoon interior are related aesthetically rather than volumetrically. The face on the outside suggests what kind of space lies within. The dimensions of that space are determined by the scenes that take place there, and not by any constraint imposed by the walls visible from the street. The self-portraits appear in different positions across the episodes in which they feature. In the episodes called Opposite Day, Squid's Visit, and Chatterbox Gary, they hang upstairs in the gallery, exactly where the studio documentation places them. In the episode Not Normal, they appear downstairs in the living room, the green wallpaper visible behind them, rather than the red of the studio. The 492 paintings shift between floors across the show's run without any documented relocation event. They are wherever the episode placed them, which was wherever the scene required. The specific wall is less important than the fact of the paintings, which are consistent across every appearance. Squidward's face, 492 times, in every available style and medium, on whatever surface happens to be behind them that week. One background character in the entire run of the show states the wrong street name for the address. During the episode Slide Whistle Stooges, this fish reports that Squidward lives on Conch Drive rather than Conch Street. The show frames this as a simple geographic error by that character, the ordinary confusion of someone who has misremembered which street a neighbor lives on. The address has always been Conch Street, but the moment exists in the episode record as a small disturbance in Bikini Bottom's otherwise stable geography, one piece of the world misstated in passing by someone who has presumably passed the address for years. Getting an address wrong is a character mistake. Getting a floor plan wrong is a production reality. Both exist across the documented history of 122 Conch Street, neither more significant than the other in terms of how the show proceeds from them. What keeps the house legible across all of its inconsistencies is not the precision of its internal layout, but the stability of its character. The green wallpaper and the pink tile, wherever the bathroom ends up in a given episode. The jazz records on whatever shelf holds them. The clamshell chandelier over whatever dining surface sits beneath it. The 58 alarm clocks in the closet, and the canopy bed, and the clarinet beside it, and the 492 self-portraits on whatever wall has space that week. These elements together constitute a recognizable Squidward interior, regardless of where the individual rooms sit relative to each other. The stone face on the exterior, carrying the same expression across every season, and every destruction, and every rebuilding, and every episode in which the production forgot to render it in the background, is what makes the structure identifiable in any shot it appears in. The face does not move. The face has always been the consistent part. Everything behind it is somewhat negotiable. Squidward's house works as a giant Easter Island head on the outside, volcanic rock and a serious stone expression, standing between a pineapple and a rock on a cartoon seafloor street. Inside it holds one person's specific life: green walls, jazz records, a shell chandelier, and close to 500 self-portraits on whatever wall has room that week. Every so often it wakes up, covers its ears, grows robot legs, levels the city, then settles back into the sand like nothing happened. It gets destroyed constantly, and returns constantly, because the story needs it there, and in cartoons that is reason enough. The rooms shift between episodes. The face never does. The house at 122 Conch Street is a monument, a mirror, and a home, from the spot between a pineapple and a rock where it has always been. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.